I turned halfway, stopped. The sheet on the far table, table 7, was rising slowly, pulled upward by an invisible hand. There was no outline of a body struggling beneath it. No twitching limbs. No movement at all. Just shape. Tall one. Broader than any corpse I'd processed that week. Too tall, too straight, too defined. But the most horrifying part wasn't the height. It was the fact that the sheet wasn't resting on anything. It was hovering. Like something was standing there that didn't need a body, only a shape. The old man by the door stepped aside, leaning his weight on the tile as if he were bowing to someone. I froze. The room, the entire morgue, inhaled. Not in air. In silence. A silence so thick I could hear my heartbeat bouncing off metal tables. Finally, the figure under the sheet spoke. Come closer. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just inevitable. Every instinct in me screamed run, but my feet weren't listening. They moved forward on their own, tiny, hesitant steps that didn't feel like mine. When I was halfway to table 7, something strange happened. The lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then they stayed on. But the shadows didn't disappear. No. They stayed exactly where they were. Frozen in unnatural positions. Stretching long and wrong across the walls as if the room had two different light sources. One natural. One not. Stop, the voice said. I did. I wasn't more than 8 feet from the table now. Close enough to see that the sheet wasn't even touching whatever stood beneath it. A perfect inch of empty air separated fabric and shape. The figure leaned forward. Or rather, the sheet did. Something beneath it was bending toward me. Even though there were no bones, no joints, no mass to support the movement. You left me here, it whispered. My mouth went dry. Who are you? I managed. The fabric rippled. Slowly. Like wind moving through cloth. You don't remember. I've never seen you before, I said. The morgue disagreed. Every sheet shifted. Every corpse twitched. A chorus of dead lungs exhaled a breath that spread across the floor like fog. You have, the figure said. You saw me before the darkness took my name. My knees buckled. This didn't make sense. None of this made sense. I'm a morgue technician, I whispered, more to myself than to the thing. I don't know you. I don't know any of you. Liar! A dozen voices echoed from the tables. The lights flickered again. But this time they didn't return to normal. They shifted. The room changed. The metal surfaces no longer reflected fluorescent white, but a faint reddish glow, like the emergency lights had come on even though they hadn't. And then I saw something that nearly made me collapse. The body that should have been on table 7 that night wasn't there. I remembered processing it earlier. Male. 40s.
Reconstruction accident.
Broken ribs. Heavy bruising. I had zipped him into his bag myself. But now the table was empty, and whatever stood under the sheet was not human. My voice cracked. What do you want from me? The figure leaned closer. The sheet tightened over its shape. To finish what you started. My pulse pounded in my skull. I didn't start anything. You did. The layered voices murmured. On the night you walked between us. When you thought we were sleeping. My stomach twisted violently. Sleeping. Not dead. A cold wave passed through the room. The sheet on table 7 lifted higher, revealing a little more shape, grotesquely long arms, a torso that seemed to elongate with every flicker of the light. And then, a memory hit me, not a full one, not clear, a sound, a hallway, dim red lights, a door slamming shut, my voice screaming for help. And someone grabbing my arm, someone cold, someone who whispered my name like a promise. I staggered backward. No, that wasn't real. That was a dream. It was years ago. Not a dream, the voice interrupted. A beginning. My breath caught in my throat. The sheet slipped off the figure and pooled on the floor. There was nothing beneath it. Nothing. Just a tall, humanoid shadow burned into the air like a silhouette made of darkness itself. No face, no features, no eyes, but it looked at me. Every corpse in the room sat up at the same time, heads turning toward it in a single synchronized motion. The shadow extended one long, jagged limb toward me. "Come," it whispered. "You belong to me." The silence snapped. A faint metallic clatter echoed from the far side of the corridor. Sharp, quick, like someone's fingertips grazing a steel tray. I stopped. Every muscle tightened. The emergency lights overhead flickered again, dimming the hall into a pulsing rhythm of red and shadow. For a moment I thought it was an illusion, my brain stitching fear into random noise. But then I saw it. The toe tag on one of the covered bodies was swaying. Not from a draft. Not from my movement. It was moving with a slow, rhythmic motion, as if something underneath the sheet was breathing. I felt the cold run straight through my spine. Then, a second body twitched. Then a third. And before I could force myself to move, something slid across the floor behind me. A soft scrape. Close. Too close. I turned, heart hammering, and realized I wasn't alone in the corridor anymore. When the dark started breathing, the temperature dropped so suddenly it felt like the air itself recoiled from my skin. My breath escaped in a shaky cloud as I pressed my back against the nearest cold metal cabinet. The red emergency lights blinked again, longer this time, casting the entire hallway into a drowning darkness before snapping back on in a blood-colored flash. That's when I heard it. A breath. Not mine. Slow. Bit. Drawn out like lungs filled with fluid forcing themselves to expand. It came from somewhere behind the row of stainless steel cadaver tables. I tried to steady my breathing, but it only made the silence around me tighter. More aware. More present. I stepped forward, my hand brushing the cold metal edge of a tray. It rattled. The sound cracked through the quiet like a gunshot. Instantly, movement. Not one body. Not a twitch. A shift. A collective weight dragging itself across the metal surfaces, as though something beneath the sheets was turning to face the sound I made. My throat went dry. The nearest sheet rose, only by a few centimeters, but enough for me to see pale fingers wrapping over the edge of the table. Not stiff. Not lifeless. They curled. Slowly. Deliberately. I staggered back, hitting the wall behind me. The cold tile pressed into my spine as my shaking hands fumbled for my phone. Maybe its flashlight could cut through this nightmare long enough for me to run. But when I raised the phone, I froze. In the reflection of its black screen, behind my shoulder, a figure was standing. Its outline was wrong. Too tall. Too thin. Like someone stretched a human silhouette until the joints bent in ways they shouldn't. The emergency lights blinked off. Total darkness swallowed us. And then the whisper came, right beside my ear, close enough that I felt the breath brush my skin. "You shouldn't have turned around." The lights flicked back on. There was nothing behind me, but every single sheet in the room had risen. Some were shaking, some were breathing, and one, directly in front of me, began to sit up. Very, very slowly. They weren't dead anymore. The sheets slid off the rising body with a soft whisper, like fabric dragged across sandpaper. What sat up wasn't a corpse. Not anymore. The skin was gray, collapsing in places, stretched in others. The chest rose and fell in a slow, unnatural rhythm, like someone imitating human breathing for the first time and getting the timing wrong. Its head lifted, and then its eyes opened. Not milky, not dead, focused on me. My legs turned to water. I backed up until my hips hit the metal table behind me, the edge digging sharply into my spine. The thing on the table leaned slightly forward, its neck creaking like old wood bending. Then, as if my fear was a signal, the rest of the room moved. Sheets fell, one by one, bodies sitting up, heads turning in stiff, jerking motions. 30 pairs of lifeless eyes flicking open in unnatural synchrony, locking onto me. And somewhere deep in the morgue, something else woke up. Something heavier. Something that didn't bother pretending to breathe. I could hear it dragging its weight across the tiles. A long, wet scrape. Then another. My instincts snapped. I bolted. My shoes hammered against the floor, echoing down the corridor as I sprinted toward the stairwell. Behind me, the bodies dropped off their tables like sacks of meat hitting the ground. Thud, 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 thud. And then came the pattering. Hands. feet, the skittering of limbs learning to move again. Fast. I reached the stairwell door and yanked the handle. Locked. Of course it was locked, power outage sealed the magnetic locks. I slammed my shoulder into the door, panic tearing at my throat. Open! Come on, open! The sound behind me grew louder. Closer. Breathing. Feet scraping. Bodies dragging themselves in a frantic tangle of limbs. I turned just in time to see one of them sprint on all fours. Not crawling. Not stumbling. Sprinting. Its limbs contorting like a broken animal. I threw myself aside. It slammed into the door with a bone-smashing crack that echoed through the entire stairwell shaft. Then the lights flickered. And for a split second, only a split second, I saw what was coming down the hallway behind the others. Not a body. Not a person. Something that had been hiding in the dark long before any of them woke up. Tall enough that its head scraped the ceiling. Skin stretched tight over an impossible frame. Its mouth open, too wide, like a vertical tear splitting its face. The lights blinked off. Total darkness. And in that void, it spoke with a voice that didn't sound like anything human. You heard us move. A hand, ice cold and impossibly strong, wrapped around my ankle, and yanked. The halls that changed when I ran. I didn't look back when I ran. Every instinct told me that turning around, even once, would be the last mistake I'd ever make. So I pushed forward, sprinting through the narrow hallway that led from the autopsy room toward the staff exit. My shoes slapped against the cold tile, each step echoing like someone was running right behind me. Except the echoes weren't in rhythm with my steps. They were faster, closer. I reached the end of the corridor and slammed my palm against the push bar of the exit door. It didn't move, not even a shudder. I threw my weight into it shoulder first, hard enough that pain jolted down my arm. Still nothing. The power's out. I whispered to myself. It's probably magnetically locked. Relax. Breathe. But even as I said it, the emergency lights overhead flickered again. Faint, reddish, unnatural. Just enough to show me something that made my skin crawl. The door had no magnetic lock. No wires. No mechanism at all. It was just a metal door. And something on the other side was holding it shut. I took a step back, chest heaving, my breath fogging in the freezing air. And then I noticed another wrong detail. The hallway behind me, where I had just run, was longer. Much longer. I shouldn't have been able to see the autopsy room from here. The corridor was barely 20 meters long. But now it stretched into darkness. Like someone had pulled its edges outward. Like the building was breathing.
No, 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 imutarat.
I pressed against the door again, then heard something shift behind me. A soft shuffle. Then another. Not walking. Dragging. Don't turn around, I whispered. But the sound grew louder. Something scraping along the floor, heavy, uneven, like limbs being pulled in ways they weren't meant to bend. A cold draft brushed the back of my neck, and I felt the fine hairs stand straight up. Then, in that stretched, distorted hallway, I heard a voice. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a groan. It was a breathy, broken attempt at speech. Like vocal cords that hadn't been used in years were trying to copy the shape of a human word. Stay. My entire body locked up. It wasn't telling me to stay. It was begging. As if whatever was behind me wasn't hunting me, but pleading with me not to abandon it. The temperature dropped even further. So suddenly that my teeth almost chattered. As the voice came again, a little clearer. Don't go. I felt pressure against my back. Not a hand. Not even a touch. Presence. Like someone was standing inches behind me, leaning close enough that I could feel the air stir. Slowly, against every instinct, I turned my head and saw something standing at the far end of the corridor. Not a corpse. Not one of the bodies. It was a silhouette, tall and narrow, like a person whose outline had been stretched too thin. Its head tilted sideways in a way no neck should bend. And even from that distance, even through the flickering red glow, I could see its chest rising and falling, trying to breathe, trying to speak, trying to be alive. The lights flickered again, and it was suddenly closer. Half the distance now. Another flicker. Closer. 10 meters. Still dragging something behind it. Another flicker. 3 meters. Close enough that I saw its shoulders moving, twitching, like it was trying to imitate the rhythm of breathing but failing. And then the lights stuttered rapidly, flashing like a dying heartbeat. And it was right in front of me, its face inches from mine. Except it didn't have a face. Just smooth, pale skin where features should have been. Stretched and too thin like a mask pulled too tight across a frame that didn't belong to it. In that same rasping, broken breath, it whispered, "You left me." My vision blurred. My legs gave out. The world tilted sideways. And before everything went black, I felt its hand. Ice cold, trembling, and impossibly gentle. Close around my wrist. Not dragging me. Not attacking me. Holding me, like it was afraid of being alone. The one that woke up. When I came to, the cold was the first thing I felt. Not the sharp, stinging chill of a freezer. This was deeper. A cold that seeped through the skin and rested in the bones, the kind that made you feel like you'd been lying still for hours, or like you weren't supposed to be warm anymore. I opened my eyes. At first, all I saw was darkness. Heavy, suffocating, absolute. Then a faint blue glow appeared above me, humming softly. A light, a fluorescent tube. I recognized it immediately. It was the ceiling of the autopsy room. I was lying on a metal table. The same metal table we kept the bodies on. A surge of panic hit so violently my chest seized. I tried to sit up, but something resisted. A weight across my torso. For a split second, my mind screamed that something was lying on me. But when my vision sharpened, I realized what it was. A sheet. A morgue sheet. Covering me. Someone, or something, had placed me onto the autopsy table and covered me like a corpse. My hands trembled as I pushed the sheet aside. The room was dim, lit only by that weak fluorescent flicker. Everything looked slightly wrong. Shadows too long, corners too dark, the air too still. Then I noticed something worse. Every other table was empty. All 5 bodies were gone. The freezers along the wall, usually humming, were silent. A few stood open, hanging ajar like someone had torn them open and searched through them in a hurry, or like something had climbed out. No, I moved them. I moved them earlier, I whispered. They weren't in the freezer, but they weren't on the racks either. The room was empty except for me, and the silence felt thick enough to choke on. I swung my legs off the table too fast and nearly collapsed. My knees buckled like I'd run a marathon and lost all strength afterward. The cold metal floor bit through my socks. That's when I heard it. A sound I will never forget. A slow, shaky inhale, coming from the corner of the room. I froze. The sound continued, another breath, ragged, uneven, the kind a person makes when they're trying to relearn how to use lungs that don't belong to them anymore. My eyes adjusted slowly, and shapes in the dark corner sharpened. Something was crouched there, slumped, facing the wall, its back rising and falling in that unnatural rhythm. My heart hammered so hard I thought my ribs would crack. I whispered, without meaning to, "Please don't turn around." The thing shifted. Not much. Just enough that I heard bones crack. Dry, brittle like branches snapping in winter. Its shoulder twitched with a jerky, unfinished movement. Then a hand. A pale, thin, trembling hand. Pressed against the floor. It began to push itself upright. Not standing. Almost unfolding. Piece by piece. "I shouldn't be here," I whispered. "I shouldn't be on this table. I shouldn't." The thing let out a wet, shaky exhale, like someone blowing out a candle. Then it spoke. Not words. Just a broken attempt at them. Like vocal cords scraping together after years of silence. The noise was halfway between a gasp and a sob. And it came with a realization that hit me so hard I almost vomited. The voice belonged to the silhouette that grabbed my wrist. The faceless thing. The stretched shape that whispered, "Don't go." I staggered backward until my hand slammed into a metal tray. The clang echoed like a gunshot. The creature flinched. And then, slowly, painfully, inevitably, it began to turn toward me. I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. Because as it twisted, I realized it wasn't just moving like a body learning how to live again. It was moving like a body remembering how it died. The light flickered, and I saw its face. Not blank anymore. Features were forming, warping, pulling out of the skin like something molding clay from the inside. A nose shaped itself first, then the outline of lips, then eyes. But they weren't looking at me. They were looking through me ***. And in a voice that sounded heartbreakingly human for just a moment, it whispered, "You woke me up." The last light. The generator didn't come back on. Emergency lights were supposed to flicker to life within seconds, but the morgue remained wrapped in a thick, suffocating darkness. My phone's flashlight was the only thing holding reality together. A thin blade of light slicing through a place that suddenly felt alive. I stepped toward the corridor, breathing hard, every inhale shaky and shallow. I had to get out. I had to end this night. My shoes squeaked lightly against the polished floor as I moved, and the sound felt too loud, too exposed. The tables behind me settled again with soft metallic pops. I didn't turn around. I was done turning around. When I reached the main hallway, I felt a cold draft brush past me, like someone walking by in a hurry. But when I flashed my phone in that direction, the hall was empty. Just the light bouncing off metal lockers and the pale green tiles. Something whispered behind me. Not a voice. Not words. Just breath. I forced myself not to spin. I kept walking. Step, step, step. Then I heard another set of footsteps behind me. Light, careful, trying not to be heard. That broke me. I turned around sharply. The hallway behind me stretched in a tunnel of darkness, my beam barely touching the walls. But in the middle of that darkness stood a shape. Person-shaped outline. Still. Too still. Like a smear of deeper black against the black. It didn't move. Neither did I. Then, tilted its head. Tiny, unnatural angle. Curious. Almost disappointed. My breath caught in my throat. My hand shook so badly the light jittered across the walls. And when it hit the shape again, it was closer. Not by walking. Not by shifting. Just suddenly closer. A single step forward and I bolted. I sprinted down the hall, lungs burning, feet slamming the floor. I didn't care if I slipped. I didn't care if something was chasing me. I already knew it was. I reached the exit door and smashed into it with my shoulder. Locked. My keycard. I fumbled for it, hands trembling so violently I nearly dropped my phone. Every second felt like hands were about to close around my neck, like something cold would brush my back. I swiped the card. Red light. No, 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 not now. Swiped again. Red. Behind me, a wet, dragging sound. Closer. I swiped a third time. Green. I pushed the door so hard I almost flew through it. The hallway outside was dim but alive with emergency power. I slammed the door shut and stumbled backward, breath shaking out of me in broken bursts. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the morgue door window. Nothing. Just darkness on the other side. Then, a pale hand pressed slowly against the glass. Not clawing. Not pounding. Just resting there, as if it wanted me to come back. The lights flickered above me, humming weakly. Somewhere far down the hall, I heard other staff rushing toward the disturbance. Someone must have triggered the secondary alarm when power failed. But I didn't stay to explain. I left my badge. I left my locker untouched. I left the building, and I never returned. 2 days later, I got a call from my supervisor. They found something in the morgue logs. Every motion detector had activated the moment the lights went out. Every single table was recorded as occupied, even the ones that had been empty for weeks. But one detail froze my blood. All motion detections were tagged under a single ID, a singular subject, one body. But that body, it had been cremated 3 days before my shift. When I asked my supervisor what the ID number translated to, he hesitated, then said, "That's the one you did intake paperwork for. The one you said didn't look dead." I didn't answer. I already knew. Somewhere in that blackout, somewhere between the tables, something had stood up, and it wasn't ready to stay dead.